Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Okay, so let's get started. I'm very pleased to introduce Ma Gonzalez. She has a very interesting background. She was trained as a neuroscientist, and she did a PhD in immersive virtual reality. And she has visited many places, MIT, Tsinghua University, and MSR. She did a wonderful internship with us 2 years ago. And she will talk about some human behavior and also design some tests for immersive telepresence. And I will be monitoring the online questions. So for people online, you can ask questions through the webpage, and I will ask questions for you. Okay, Ma, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, first of all, I want to say, wow, it's very exciting to be here today. I have prepared a talk that will mostly show empirical evidences of how we can alter human perception and behavior through immersive virtual reality. In order to do so, you'll see I'll introduce several experiments, so we will go through that. Most of the work that I will present here is immediately related to my PhD with Mel Slater in University of Barcelona and the MIT, as well as my postdoc at the Virtual Environments and Computer Graphics Group at the University College London. You'll see during the research here that it has a strong component on computer science and neuroscience, which are my two backgrounds. And let's go into it. So I want to start by proposing the two main methods that I've used to generate immersive virtual reality during my research. The first one is the cave systems, which combine with real-time computer graphics, of course. So the cave is a room in which the walls are screens, and once the participant enters, all the projections of the screens are generated from his point of view, so everything is rendered from his position. This is a stereo video, and it creates the illusion that you enter another space, a virtual reality. The second approach for generating this immersive virtual reality is using head-mounted displays. We can render the virtual reality from the point of view of the participant using this technology. And it has similar effects to using a cave. There are some differences. We will go through that later. But let's focus on the common effects. And one of the common effects that I find fascinating is that when people enter an immersive virtual reality, they experience what is known as the presence illusion. And it's usually described by a combination of two factors. The first one is the place illusion, this illusion that you are somewhere else, and the plausibility illusion, which is the illusion that the events that are occurring are really happening, which is more important because when participants are given a plausible situation, they behave realistically. A clear example of this realistic behavior can be seen here in this experiment by Mehan et al. In SIGGRAPH 2002. They asked participants to cross a room with a cliff. You can see the real scenario here, the virtual reality. And it's interesting to see that all the participants went through the wall, even though they knew there was no real cliff. Not only that, they reported feeling like they could fall, and also they underwent strong psychological, physiological changes, such as heart rate increase. So we do find realistic behaviors and reactions inside a virtual environment. And these responses are also realistic when you interact with an avatar. For example, imagine you enter an immersive virtual reality, and the avatar that you're interacting with sneezes. So it's very likely you're going to say, bless you. So it would just feel impolite not to do so. So this realistic behavior can potentially be exploited for sociological or behavioral experiments, so using immersive virtual reality for that. And precisely at UCL, in the cave at UCL, we carried out a reproduction of the Stanley Milgram experiment on obedience to authority. This is an experiment where people are asked to give increasing electroshocks to a learner when the answer is wrong. And well, Milgram's findings, he did this with real people, so Milgram's findings were shocking. He found people would provide life-threatening shocks under the command of an authority figure. Okay, we have to think of these studies under the background of how could people behave like that during the Second World War. They were trying to figure out how can people follow the authority this way. So even though the shocks were not real, participants didn't know that. And they were simulated, of course. But there was an unethical area there because there was a deception scheme, and this is kind of banned by ethical committees at the moment. So, but in virtual reality, we can do it anyway because it's no deception there. Participants know they are interacting with a synthetic avatar. So I want to show you a video of this VR experiment.
I'm ready to begin. Are you also ready?
So we recorded the motion capture from a real actor and the audio. The participant has to read aloud all these words. The first one has to be matched with one of the 4 choices below. And the only correct one is the one that is highlighted. So,
can you repeat that, please?
Pollen, grass, flower, tree, soil.
Flower.
That's incorrect.
so it starts pretty
Correct answer was tree.
pretty soft. The shocks, they increase. It's very annoying as an experimenter to do this because you feel people don't really like to do it.
Necklace, ring, gold.
Necklace.
That was incorrect. The correct answer was gold.
Let me out. I've had enough.
Okay, so we see at some point the avatar starts trying to fight the experimenter.
Size, magic, man, squid.
Forget it. I'm not answering.
Remember that if he doesn't answer, the answer should be taken as incorrect.
I don't want to continue. Don't listen to her.
It's kind of funny because I'm triggering also the avatar, no? But
Please continue.
Okay, yeah, that's incorrect. The correct answer was size.
You have no right to keep me here. Let me out.
so let's just keep it here, but it goes worse and worse, and at the end, the avatar doesn't respond anymore. So let's go into the actual experiment. So we ran 20 participants in this condition where they interact with the avatar, and 20 control participants that did not interact with the avatar. They just read the words continuously, like giving the choices. Okay. We find the same results as Milgram. People follow the authority, and authority being me in this case, the experimenter. But anyway, so they are given a task and they follow it. But we do find something interesting, which is they increase their anxiety level the more they feel this is realistic. So this is the somatic perception questionnaire that you provide before and after the experiment, and see whether they've been like having stronger heart rate or these kind of things. So it's something that people perceive. How much do you perceive your heart rate being? And after the experiment, so you do the difference pre-post, and we find that people that were believing the realistic environment, the plausibility illusion, they had a stronger perception. Not only that, we also find that the participants try to help the avatar. So here we have the experimental condition and the control condition, and this is the sound pressure level of the words that they read aloud. And this is the correct word, and these are the other options. So they are significantly saying louder the correct word, trying kind of helping the avatar, even though many of them they don't actually notice. And we wanted to rule out that it was only because the word was in capital letters, so that's why we ran the control condition, but this doesn't happen in the control condition. Okay, so we find this realistic behavior, and we find that we can use immersive virtual reality to study and change behavior in people. And not only that, we can also use immersive virtual reality and the advantages of the head-mounted displays to not only make people feel like they are on a new location, but also that their body has been substituted by a functional body. And this process is sometimes referred as embodiment. So let's have a look at how can we substitute this real body for a virtual body. There is more information on how to do technically this in here. Okay, so basically when a body is collocated with the participant's body and it moves like the participant does, this generates a body ownership illusion. Let's see the video. So you can see there is a motion capture system working in real time, and this is what he's seeing. He can see basically as he moves around, okay? So there is quite a bit of technology working here in real time, as I was saying, the head-mounted display, the motion capture, and it creates this illusion of you being embodied on a different body. And I want to enter a bit more on the underlying neuroscience factor that allow for a participant to really feel this body ownership illusion. And there are multiple studies have been done in perception without any technology at all, only mannequins or rubber hands. And it's possible for people to perceive this external body part as their own under the proper multisensory stimulation. This is synchronous visotactile or visomotor stimulation. So I'm going to show you a video so you really understand what I'm saying. So this is the participant. He puts his hand behind a curtain, and we put a rubber hand just in front of him. So he only really sees the rubber hand, but he feels synchronous touch in both hands. So at the end, he thinks this is his hand because he's seeing the touch and feeling the touch. And there are ways of measuring this illusion. You'll see now one of the ways to measure is pretty drastic. Okay, so there is a response to a harm, and this is not a fake. This was an actual participant. I mean, he really felt the ownership illusion, and the stimulation lasted what the video lasts, less than a minute. You already feel this hand being your hand. Another interesting way of measuring this illusion is by a proprioceptive drift. If you ask them to close their eye and point like where their hand is, many people don't say where their actual hand is, but somewhere in between the rubber, which is something that doesn't happen when the stimulation is asynchronous. So there is a proprioceptive drift. Some people have found temperature drop as if you were rejecting your own hand, so the temperature drops. But, well, basically, they're underlying proprioceptive multisensory integration ways of generating the illusion. And of course, the illusion can be also generated over the whole body. I ran an experiment, it's one of my earliest scientific contributions, to show whether this illusion can be enhanced using real-time mirrors. During the experiment, you have a mirror that you can see your body there. And here we don't do visotactile, like we don't touch. You are self-stimulating by the motor action, so you see you're moving and the body moves. So I'm going to show you the video. Here is the person moving around. So we can see also that we don't need to have the whole body tracked sometimes we can use in here inverse kinematics to do the rest of the body movement. So this mirror was like just one of my first developments at the lab. I was a research assistant, and I was helping the researchers in the laboratory preparing OpenGL graphics. And here you can see all of a sudden there is a harm. In this case, the harm is something that comes to you, and people try to avoid it only in the synchronous condition. So let's see, okay, they don't want to get in the middle, but at the same time, okay. So that's what we find. So let's now focus. So that mirror, you'll see it repeats over many other experiments that people have done in the lab later, because it really enhanced the illusion. So what is interesting of this technology is that we can modify the virtual body in almost impossible ways. For example, enlarging your hand. People don't, like this experiment by Kilkenny, people would touch a surface and the virtual hand would expand as they are touching. People wouldn't notice that the hand was super large until it was up to 2 meters or 40 inches, which is super big. Other experiments, they've shown people accept larger bellies, and then they have a proprioceptive drift. When you ask them where your belly is, they think it's larger. You can change the age of the participant. You can change the gender or the race also. So you can embody people in different race avatars and everything. And interestingly, using this multisensory stimulation, we can also embody people in robots. And here, I'm going to show you this work is part of the EU Future and Emerging Technologies Project VERE, which aim at enabling strongly paralyzed people to re-enter the physical world, embodying a robot.
The electrodes measure brain impulses, enabling a person to control the robot's actions without moving their own limbs. The idea is to enable severely disabled people to enter the world via a real-life avatar.
The actions are associated with squares that are flashing with different frequencies, and the operator can trigger an action by simply focusing attention on one of the squares. The frequency of the flashing will be reproduced in the brain's visual cortex, so we can detect which square the operator is looking at.
So, pointing up to the side. Giving a I don't know kind of gesture.
Okay, so we presented this to the Vice President of the European Commission, Nelly Kroes, in Vilnius in 2013. It was a kind of interesting hit. And you can read a bit more about how this can be used in a social environment in this paper. So overall, it seems like we can substitute this body. And it also seems like this field of self-body perception can clearly benefit of using VR technology. And there is associated research to this having virtual bodies. So one of the things we can study is all these thresholds, like how can you accept these radical changes and which changes are actually not accepted. Another is to study the implications of the body modifications. For example, in the experiment of Tabitha Peck on the racial bias, he would put Caucasian participants into black avatars, and that would reduce the racial bias towards black people. So we can find attitudinal changes, behavioral changes. And of course, it seems very interesting also just to study how can this really happen? How is the body represented in the brain, and how do we manipulate it? So how can it be that a virtual stimuli, computer generated, is processed maybe as a real stimuli, and how can we prove that? So the next 3 experiments that I will present are more into the neuroscience perspective. And they are directly related with my PhD. So I'm going to show these three ideas. Is the first one, this is like, okay, an axis. And the first one is, how can I believe this is my body, this ownership? We're going to test it and see what's going on in the brain and how do I accept changes to the body. Then, okay, I can control it, so I have agency over it. What happens if, for example, you're controlling a robot and all of a sudden somebody hacks into it and moves the robot in another direction? How are you going to perceive that error? And the last one is, what if it looks just like me? No, is that going to affect how much I feel embodied into it? Or so to explore all of this, I'm going to just, because we want to see how the brain interprets the virtual stimuli. So we actually turn into EEG. Many of you already know EEG has a great temporal resolution. We're talking about milliseconds. But it has some bad signal-to-noise ratio. Like, I cannot see anything here. And also, it has kind of bad spatial resolution. I mean, how many neurons are beyond one of these electrodes? But some of these limitations can be overcome using a very methodological approach. This is, for example, using event-related potentials. When we know the exact moment in which we are presenting a stimuli, we can measure how this stimuli is processed, okay, right after. If we present the same stimuli several times, we can average and erase noise and non-related activity. So we can see that when we present this stimuli 80 times, we find this response with these components. Negative component in 100 milliseconds, a positive, a negative, etc. And this happens in different parts of the brain, and different stimuli will produce different signals. So here, this is the typical oddball paradigm, where odd stimuli are having a stronger P300. Okay, so we'll just go with that and figure out these are microvolts, so you blink and they are out. So we have to be careful with that. I will focus on the first experiment now, on this aspect of the body substitution. So if people really believe that this is their body, if somebody threats that body, they should have a realistic response. Okay? We're gonna basically have two conditions. This person is embodied into this avatar. When it's looking down, sees exactly the avatar. And we present these two stimuli here. And we measure EEG. We measure whether they move their hand. We ask them not to move their hand. We really want to see what happens in the brain before any conscious decision is going on, like deciding to move. And I have a little video here, so you see. Okay, so you see, this is the first person perspective. The participant can look around. It's in a different environment. When he's looking down, his body or her body has changed for, like, it's been changed. And then we have these two conditions. And we repeat them many times and see what happens. So what happens is we find an activity in the motor cortex. There is a motor activation both in time and frequency domains. We're going to focus on the readiness potential to start with. So there is a readiness potential starting about 250 milliseconds after the stimulus is presented. I want to explain you a bit more what is this readiness potential. This readiness potential is the difference in voltage between the two hemispheres of the motor cortex. And from Benjamin Libet's studies on free will, we know that this potential happens for movement preparations unconsciously before the conscious urge to act. So Benjamin finds that we actually inhibit motor actions rather than create motor actions. And these are the typical responses of a motor action that is being prepared. Okay. Furthermore, when we look only at the contralateral hemisphere of the right hand, as you know, if you move the right hand, you find the activity on the left hemisphere. And we find a mu rhythm desynchronization. Mu rhythm is between 10 and 12 hertz, is related with motor action, only in the hand condition after 1 minute, 1 second after the stimuli. And here we can see the baseline versus the response, 1 second short time power spectrum. We see clearly there is a motor preparation here. Similar to the motor imagery if you have worked with the brain-computer interfaces. Not only that, we find all these voltages are correlated with the strength of the ownership illusion. So the more you feel the illusion, the stronger you react to the attacks. Okay, refer to this paper for more details. And well, we find that if we are really in the virtual body, when we attack it, the motor cortex prepares for a hand movement, and the level of ownership modulates this activation. Not only that, there is a role of these ERP amplitudes on the pain perception. I haven't talked about pain perception, but you can check on the paper if you're more interested on that. And basically, we can say that people are accepting these virtual bodies on a very unconscious level. Not only at this level, they are preparing like very realistic response. If somebody attacks me, I would like to move out from there. Okay, so let's move to the next experiment in which we know the body has been accepted and we know we can move it. So how does this control really happen? And what if we generate external errors? So when we execute a motor action normally, we experience a certainty about the ownership of the body and the agency of the actions. If I move this hand, I know this hand is mine, and the action of moving the hand is mine. However, when there is conflicted information, we undergo a break on agency. This is something that rarely happens to healthy humans, but existing pathologies such as the anarchic hand syndrome, where people cannot inhibit certain motor actions. So one hand can possibly go somewhere you don't want it. So probably due to a disconnection between the contralateral hemisphere and the frontal lobe. But we don't want to enter that much into here. We want to create a scenario where there are motor errors. So we create this rapid decision-making task, which is an Ericsson flanker task. This flanker task, you have to follow what the arrow says, the arrow in the middle, and there can be distractor arrows pointing in the other direction to kind of make it more complicated, or in the correct direction. So let's watch a video. Well, interestingly, when you're doing this experiment, of course, people go very fast and they make their own errors, so self-generated errors. I had to go there, but I went in the other direction. But in virtual environments, we can also generate external errors in which the participant did go in the right direction, but the avatar went in the opposite direction. So let's have a look at how this task really works. So the participant is here, his body is substitute, and the hand is tracked, again with inverse kinematics. So the task is going to start. Okay, he missed this one. Okay, wrong. So actually, when you observe this, you also generate the similar response just by observing somebody making mistakes. And there it went, one of these externally generated errors. We will see another one. I'll let you know when it happens. So every 20 trials, we introduce an externally generated error in which the avatar you'll see will go to this side, and the person will go to this side, and the avatar to the other side. And you'll see it here now. Okay, so we can see we have these two conditions, really, congruent movements, incongruent movements. And we ask participants to go 1,280 trials, which is like 15 minutes of this task. And what we find is that when people make their own mistake, like the arrow was pointing here, I'm going in the other direction, there is an error-related negativity happening 100 milliseconds after the motor action starts, only for the real self-generated error. And this doesn't happen with the externally generated error, nor the correct responses. Okay, you see both are very similar. But here, in the posterior electrode, we find that for the externally generated errors, there is a strong negativity that happens much later, about the 400 milliseconds. So here we can see more clear without, this is the difference waveform minus the correct. So it's real error minus the correct and external errors minus the correct. You can clearly see one is frontal, the other is parietal. Also temporally, they happen on different spans. And let's look at these two errors. So this error is well described in the literature. It's called error-related negativity. It's maximal at the frontal electrodes. And this other one, we call it M400. And it only happens when there is an agency disruption. And when we look at the literature, we find similar errors for semantic violations. If I say, I was going to eat a house, you're going to have an M400. But if I say I'm going to eat a pizza, it doesn't sound so strong. So we believe that there is a semantic violation of how you perceive the world. You really thought the hand should be there, and it's going the other direction. So both components are associated to different error monitoring loops. And I don't want to enter too much in the neurocognitive models of error monitoring, but I want to just show you. Let's go very quickly through this. Basically, when you have a motor action, you create a motor command, and you execute the movement. So in our brain, what's happening is we have several controls to see whether the movement was the one that I wanted to execute. So I create a copy of this efferent movement, and I compare it to my original state, like where was I supposed to go? And if there is an error here, I find this error-related negativity, okay? This is the one, the arrow is pointing here, and I'm going the other direction. So, but our brain has a second mechanism, which is once I've produced the movement, I get my sensory input. So this is an afferent feedback. And I compare it to this copy that I had and the intended state. And if there is an error here, we're finding this N400. These models are from Gallagher and Fritz. So there are these two error monitoring mechanisms happening concurrently. And just to finalize with this experiment, I want to show you that this N400 strength, so the more negative, the stronger the agency disruption, is correlated with the sense of ownership of the virtual body. The more you feel this is your virtual body, the stronger the break on the agency is. Okay, so just want to say that we find two different kinds of errors. It's different. The brain recognizes the internal errors and the externally generated errors as different. So if somebody hijacks my robot, I'm going to notice it. And we find that as an agency violation trace in this N400. We find a correlation associated with the illusion of ownership. And we also support these theories of error monitoring models because they have been proved, but it's been very hard for them to prove actually this specific error loop, external error loop, because in reality it's very hard to actually produce that sensation that you go in one direction, but the hand goes in the other one, which in a virtual environment we can do. Okay, so let's move to the last experiment here. So we've seen the body can be accepted unconsciously, that we can control it, and if there is a break, we break the agency over that body, so we lose this ownership illusion, kind of. And what if it looks like me? So we ran an experiment because there is some research here before us that about this, how people can be induced in ownership illusions on avatars of different races, genders that share more or less similarities with the participant. And some studies say that the more the avatar looks like the participant, there is a stronger identification. But we want to find whether this is perceived also on the neurological side. So we prepare an experiment where we bring participants and we create an avatar that looks like them, like an unknown person, and like a friend. Okay, we use the FaceGen software for that. So each of the participants is observing the images randomly during 30 minutes, and its face is shown for 300 milliseconds. So this is super fast. And we do subjective scoring, how much this avatar looks like the real person, okay? So what we find is that, well, this is the visual cortex is over here on the back of our head, and we find traces of object recognition, okay? Usually when the object is classified as a different category, we find a difference in the N170. So this object is different than that object. So this is 170 milliseconds after the stimuli, so it's super fast. And we don't find differences here, so they are same class objects. But we do find differences, P200 also referred as N250. Here is when we first access the memory, and we see that the self is processed with much less power in voltage than the other images, both for the real faces and for the virtual faces. So that means somehow this virtual face that looks like you, and this is significant difference, this virtual face that looks like you is actually being accepted or processed in a different way than the other faces. Not only that, we find a correlation between the subjective and the unconscious identification. By unconscious, I mean this rapid 200 milliseconds, the brain is already making the distinction. And the subjective is the questionnaire, like how much this face looks like you. For the self faces, we find that this P200 difference between the real face and the virtual face of the self, so the closer to 0, the better. It means you are processing them exactly the same. The difference is 0. And the higher the score. So actually, there is a correlation in the way we're combining a higher cognitive function with a very low voltage result. Okay, so here, this is very interesting. And basically, we find that, of course, if the avatar looks like you can be more identified with it, but not only that, also at the neurological level. So they can recognize a lookalike avatar. The correlation between the fast recognition mechanisms and the subjective scoring. And of course, this has many applications because maybe this way we can introduce a stronger self-identification towards avatars for behavioral studies, or maybe even measure the identification on lookalike avatars because, well, this looks like him to a degree, but maybe we could generate a better avatar and then we generate better. We could study the uncanny valley. And okay, so basically we have seen that we can use immersive virtual reality to study the aspects of or alter the behavior and perception, to embody people into robots or avatars, And also, in the last part, to study the mechanisms involved in this body representation in the brain. Okay. And well, after all these empirical studies showing the many ways in which we can use immersive virtual reality to alter human perception and behavior, I really want to end this talk going back to the bigger picture. So up until now, consumers have interacted with many different technologies from a first-person perspective. I have the phone, I can move it, I can touch it, I can see. But the content has remained constrained inside the device most of the cases. Of course, there have been metaphors of tangible interfaces, some very great. But the reality is that those initiatives have not reached the market in a standardized way. But I think this is about to change, because lately we've seen all this boom on immersive technologies, HMDs that are aiming to consumers, at consumers, Oculus, Samsung VR, HoloLens. And these technologies have the potential to blend the digital content and the real physical world, which will allow us to interact with the content from a first-person perspective, not only with the device. Okay, for me, that means two things. The first one is that we have to create the technology that can provide the highest quality of experience for the user, so they can be able to literally feel the digital content with their senses from a first-person perspective, and do so through natural interactions. We will need a much higher degree of ambient intelligence, of course, better tracking systems, tangible metaphors, haptics, displays, etc., all of them working together in real time. But the other thing that this means to me is that we must be aware that in a fully blended reality where digital content is blended with physical content, the way these things are going to be processed in the brain as real physical content might affect how people behave or perceive their reality. Okay, so, well, for me, there is no doubt that MSR with so many experts in different disciplines is the perfect platform to really shape the future of immersive technologies. And, well, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So you showed that people really, if it's done correctly, people feel that what they do in the virtual world is actually doing it and experiencing it. So, obviously one of the first uses of these technology will be games. So would you say that if a person playing a shooting game, immersive shooting game, does he feel the same experience as if he shot a person?
Well, I think it's more close to reality than on a screen. As we were saying just now, the content, it's you can feel the content or you can just see the content inside a device, and that makes a difference. And we've seen that, for example, if I see a clip on my screen, I'm not going to have a heart rate increase, but people do when they are actually inside a virtual clip. So at least in the short term, we will find the physiological responses, we will find behavioral changes, perceptual changes. Maybe people get used to it, and it's kind of related to me with some people suffering hallucinations. So real people suffer hallucinations all the time. I have the feeling that my phone is vibrating, but it's not. And I really have that feeling. It's a bottom-up coming from the sensory input. But when I checked, it's not. And I'm able to distinguish what's an hallucination from what's not. But for example, people with the schizophrenia, some of them, they are not able of making that distinction. So maybe in the future, basically, we're able of distinguishing what's virtual from what's real. But we have to make the conscious thought about it, because our brain is actually thinking the sensory input is saying me this, so must be real. And I think it's very similar to an hallucination in a sense. And so I do think people will make the difference between real and virtual, of course, but the stimuli are going to be physical, like a physical object. So people will just perceive them as real things. Yeah, sorry.
You mentioned newness, and I think back to the famous example of when War of the Worlds was on the radio, and people really thought that aliens had landed. And in part that was because radio was a new medium. People hadn't acclimated to what might be true or not true there, and it imitated a news report. So I'm wondering, is there any way to control for the novelty of the experience? Because people haven't yet figured out how to separate this from reality.
Yeah. So I think the answer is not really. In fact, when you gave the Oculus or one of these devices to a person who first enter, they either get super sick because of the not good multisensory integration, the vestibular, because we are not stimulating all the sensors, and or they are just like, wow, you know, it blows your mind. When I enter to that experiment or to that, I said, yeah, it's all right, you know. So I really think it's a matter of time. So the first time you try it, it's, you know, like the first time you got a phone, you just don't remember because technology goes so fast, it changes so fast. But the first time you use a technology, of course, it has a different impact on you. Well, I mean, that's my view, but I would say so. I would say the first time it's going to be stronger than other exposures. Yeah?
So a related question. So in your first experiment, you had kind of the knife appear on the table, cutting the hand. You did that 60 times, I think. Did you see a difference in people's response over the 60 trials, especially in like, did their psychosomatic responses decrease? Did they also like, you know, did other things change? Like, did they make more errors over time? Very good question.
Yes, they do decrease. But we don't have enough trials to really do different averages. The same happens with the faces. The more time you're exposed, the more you see that avatar look like you, for the people that have said that the avatar looks like them, and the less for the people that say the avatar didn't look like them. So you either reject or accept, and you get accustomed. Yeah, there is a time accustomation.
So would you say that virtual experiences become less immersive over time as they don't compute with our other senses?
No, I would say it's more about the surprise effect. Like the first time you get a tweet, it's like, wow, no? And then when you have so many of them, you just don't have the surprise. Or I think the surprise effect is very important.
Related to that, have you done or are you aware of any research that compares the surprise effect, like somebody watching a horror movie will jump when something bad happens on the screen, compare that to the virtual reality, similar kind of jump scare experience?
I haven't done that myself, but a colleague from UCL, Sylvia Pan, she was running an experiment on moral dilemmas. And basically this was a museum. The avatars were like not really human looking, just like draws. And one of the avatars would enter and there was this elevator. You were manipulating the elevator, so that was your task. And with the elevator, you move people to the second floor of the museum or to the first floor. And all of a sudden, one of the little avatars starts shooting. And you have to move the elevator, you know. Either you decide to kill the 4, or if you don't do anything, you kill the 4. If you move the elevator down, you kill the 1. But then it's your action. You have decided to kill that 1 versus the other thing is. So there is a moral dilemma there. I don't want to enter into this. But she ran the experiment in a cave and in a desktop, and she found very strong differences in physiological response. So when people really feel they are in the place, and this is everything we find, like in the Milgram experiment here, we find that the more plausible the situation, the more presence illusion, the stronger the response is. And some people have stronger illusions. And I think over time, for example, if I enter a new scenario, I immediately have a very strong illusion after having been to many scenarios. I know what is not real or anything, but every time I put myself into a new body, it's like, wow, I love it. And some people are just like, you know, I think this grows on you. But it doesn't happen when you are on a screen. So there is a difference.
Why are all the stimuli negative?
Negative, yeah, it's so bad.
Yeah,
I know.
Why are there no positive stimuli in these tests?
So in general, it's very difficult to measure how embodied you are until you break the embodiment, or how much agency you have until you break the agency. Or so this, it's funny because it comes from the rubber hand illusion. So this is like Nature 1998 already, and they are using a harm. They are attacking the hand to measure the response. And so it's pretty consistent over the research in perception that you attack something. We have done some workshops in the laboratory to think of new ways not having this bad negative impulse. But really, it's very hard. For example, there were some experiments in which we would do a beep, and then they would have to rate like how much embodied they thought they were, and then you would do the average over time. But it's much faster if you show a thread and you see what happens. Like then you really see whether they were embodied or not. So, but on the other hand, you break the illusion, so you cannot continue the experiment so well. Sometimes it has a balance, no?
Sorry, continue that. It sounds like virtual reality then is only going to be used to convince me that bad things are happening.
No. No, but actually very nice things happen in virtual reality, I would say. No, it's nice because you enter a new space, you can visit, you may be running with Lionel Messi on the football camp. But the truth is, for us to measure this kind of illusions is sometimes very hard. So that's why some other experiments don't use harm, they use proprioceptive drift. For example, for the thresholds, these things of how fat you are, how long your arm is. You don't really need to thread the hand. You just say like, where is your hand? And then your hand is farther away, There is a bit of everything. In my experiments, I like this because it's super instantaneous stimuli. And I need that for the EEG because I'm talking about milliseconds.
Related to this thread, I wonder if there is a way I wonder if the EEG signals will have a difference when people feel happy or people feel sad. I wonder if
I think that could be, but that would be like general mind state. And because we are averaging just the stimulus-related component, so we just focus on the stimulus-related information. At the end, you average that out, the same as you average the noise out, there are many things you cannot measure with EEG, really. And I'm very skeptical about the people that use one electrode and they say they're measuring emotions. Like they are so simple with one electrode, you can measure them. And so yeah, I don't think you can even measure that here.
I have a question from online audience. The question was, do you have any comments on the impact on some gamers that the first-person mode of the GTA 5 and if people feel uneasy?
Yeah, I know, this is a hot topic. Maybe we will know soon because at least in Utah, they are starting this amusement park with virtual reality. And it looks very exciting to go there. And they are putting a shooting game, so maybe, there is already a problem in this country with that, but maybe we'll see it growing.
You said that was where?
So in Utah, yeah.
Which place?
I don't know, but if you look Utah virtual reality amusement park, you'll find it. It came out last month. They are building it, and it looks really cool. Really. Sorry, so many hands. Yeah.
So besides games, where do you think that virtual reality could be used? Like, for example, like in a learning environment or whatever. Future.
Yeah, I think any environment really. Like, for example, here I didn't show, now I work for Airbus, and we're doing research on how to use this technology for training scenarios. And there are many interesting things, like many of the jigs that we use for assembling they are super expensive. So if you have to train somebody and rent the space out while this is not being productive, so if you can generate a 3D version of that, and then you can really work on that without having the physical object in front of you. And so for learning, I think it has really strong applications. Okay.
So you did some experiments on having people in bodies that didn't quite look like their own. Did you do anything with, say, embodiment for non-human bodies, like if you had a robot hand or a tentacle or something?
So we did the robot embodiment, and that worked pretty well. So it's crazy how the brain accepts and how flexible the brain is into accepting modifications. And well, you have here Jaron Lanier in this building who is very much into these things. And I think you accept very strong changes, like, for example, having a different body or having 3 hands. Or, like, if it works like you think it should work, like if I move this hand and then the 3rd hand or something, you know. I mean, for example, for digital acting, I think if the actors would have this in real time, maybe they do better, like I'm embodied in a 4-leg whatever. So they are better at acting because right now it's so abstract for them. They are just doing the motion capture. And imagine they are saying, oh, okay, yeah, this moves like this, of course. And then I do this and all the hands go, you know, like a wave or, okay?
How much do you think that virtual reality will have an effect on, like, a person's personality and behavior? Because I know that, like, I read something somewhere that people who watch more violence in the media are more accepting of violence, and they actually become more violent themselves.
Yeah.
And so if, you know, this virtual reality is like more exposure to this, will that have a higher impact on someone's tolerance for violence?
Yeah, for the good and for the bad. For example, Mel is running now with the Justice Department in Spain. We have violence in the homes, you know, male abusers scenario, and the European Union is strongly pushing into working for that, and we got a grant on there. And we have found that they are currently, violent offenders are being sent into the virtual reality with Mel Slater. And they are having an effect, I mean, to the extent that you can do, because they are not exposed continuously. It's a one-off. But the judge is sending them to here. It's sort of another therapy method. You have role-playing, you have maybe this scenario. In this scenario, the violent offender sits on the victim place. So it's like a role-playing, and then he watches this. Because it's not really violent, it's maybe verbal violence in many cases. There are not that many offenders that actually go all the way. Maybe they are just being very, very bad people.
So will there be like controls on this so the whole population doesn't become more violent or something like that? Or is there?
I don't think there will be. I mean, why? I mean, it's free will kind of thing, unless it's starting to affect the rest of us for real in a very dramatic way. Anything can happen, but I don't know. I mean, I think it could be that some therapies really benefit from this, and they are already working on flight fear, no? Or this kind of scenarios, because you take it out and you're in real life. So before you decide to go on an airplane, if you're fear of heights or fear to fly. Or...
So are there people who are not affected by this, say, like who clearly separate virtual reality and reality? So like, I don't care if my arm is cut in virtual reality at all.
Some people, but we can see that. I mean, people are affected to different levels. That's why we have these presence illusion or presence questionnaires that we ask for these kind of things. How realistic you think it was? And did you feel you were in a different place? These kind of questions really let you know how much somebody feels that. But this also happens, for example, with the rubber hand illusion. Some people don't have it at all. So it's a matter of how you perceive things. Your brain is a matter of your brain, real.
Is it a big percentage or?
No, it's very low, I would say. It depends. Some people need more time. Some people, they're like, but I would say about a 5% or something like that.
And one second question. So does it affect say, if in virtual reality I crash cars all the time when I play games, have you studied like permanent brain effects to my behavior and for real life? Will I be more prone to crashing?
Well, I guess, I don't know. I mean, this is pretty unknown yet. But I would say it's like the hallucination case I was mentioning before. If you know you are in the reality, if you lose your mind, we better detect it before you start crashing. But I would say that it's a matter of you having your mind able of distinguishing what's real, what's virtual. All right.
Could you comment on the advantages and disadvantages of the cave versus head-mounted display, maybe even the differences between see-through?
So the main difference is that in a cave, you're represented by your own body. And in an HMD, your body can be substituted. And in fact, if you have tried the Oculus, one of the things that to me are strikingly bad is that I don't have a body. And in reality, I have a body. And if not, I'm just an observer. So I think HMDs need to have a body. We don't conceive life without a body. Like, what are we, out-of-body illusions? Are we ghosts? No, we need the body to interact, to do things. Otherwise, we don't have this real scenario. And in a cave, there is a stronger illusion that you enter something because you physically enter, but at the same time, you remain in the same place. So there are different connotations that I would say for example, we use caves very much for behavioral studies and not so much for perception. I would say because in a cave, you really have this very, very big field of view, for example, because you are actually inside somewhere. So if there are many avatars and they are interacting with them, for example, Aitor Rovira in UCL, he's working with violent scenarios where some people start a fight and you're looking at the bystander effect. If there are many people around, you don't want to act, but if you're the only one there, then you will intervene and stop the fight. And this is done in a cave because I think it's better for you to really have, but I think at the moment the head-mounted display really has the same field of view, and then we are over caves.
Have there been any studies that they're done both in a cave and an HMD that measure a sense of presence, for example, and find one is better than the other?
For example, Seinfeld at Mel's lab, she's worked in fear of heights in a cave and in an HMD. I don't think she really found much difference because you have a body in both. The difference, for example, is if you wouldn't have a body. But I kind of like better the HMDs because they give you this chance to substitute your body also.
In your third experiment, it wasn't clear to me, when you had real faces and virtual faces, were they kept in separate treatments of this is all real faces that were either familiar or unfamiliar and these were all virtual, or were they intermingled?
They would be totally random, all of them. But for analysis purpose, I put them like this. Otherwise, you would see like many lines and not understand anything.
And so when the person would see their kind of avatar of themselves, was there a measurable difference between that and the real photo of themselves? I mean, they were both measurably like identified as self, but was there still a delta between the two of them?
Yes. For some participants, this was very low difference. For some, it was higher. And that's what we were saying here, that this difference, exactly the one we are talking about, the voltage difference between the virtual and the real self, was actually correlated with the identification. So the more I really think that avatar face looks like me, the more my brain processes it like me.
And so it'd be interesting if there'd be any kind of follow-up on what aspects or differences of the face map to or correlate better to identifying the self. Like if you change the eye color,
for example,
is
that's
that easy
one
to ignore?
application.
If you change it, it's a big
component. I think there need to be, they would be very extreme changes, because look, this avatar, it's not super perfect. And it's already been identified as the self, so I'm not sure if you would really see many differences. But if you have like strong differences, maybe you will. In fact, some experiments, they actually fade from one unknown person to your face without avatars, and they find the difference, you know, when you start recognizing the self or when you start recognizing the other.
It would be interesting to correlate with different components to like know like, well, the eye shape is more important than the jaw shape for creating more immersive.
There are some experiments in this field of face perception in which, for example, they move around the parts, like two left eyes or these kind of things, and people still recognize themselves. And so, well, recognize the face, sorry. And okay, yeah?
I'm really interested in that M400 error example that you gave, which the exact bit was I was going to eat a house. And yeah, that's an error, but it's an error that you might find in poetry, in that it would create an effect, it maybe change the way you look at the world, something like that.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, are people trying to think through the idiom of VR in the same way you might think of, well, house doesn't correlate to eat, and are people trying to create new experiences for the sake of like expanding reality, like creative experiences?
Yeah.
Or is it still
this is done on auditory stimulation, so there is no virtual reality for this kind of experiments. They were first found by a researcher in the Netherlands, and he basically, in the Netherlands, I don't remember now, but the trains are just one color, like yellow. And he would tell people the train is blue, and people would have this response. And when he would say the train is yellow, people wouldn't have that response. And then he was like, okay, this is a violation on how they understand the world. And they, so he continued working on this area of research. And the reason I show this here is really because it's in the literature, it's very similar to what we find. It doesn't mean that this is virtual reality. It's not. But it may mean that because here you have perceptual input, so afferent signal that needs to be integrated, and it gets integrated here. And it has the same temporal dynamics as of the other afferent signals, which in our case is visual. And so it really kind of matches. So this is our discussion. Of course, when you have EG, they don't tell you anything about the interpretation. So you have to look at the literature and find out what can it be, or if other people have found similar things. But this is not just about virtual reality. This is about you feeling that body as yours and moving it, and then the break on the agency, rather than just virtual reality. So it's about your own body. Okay.
So actually, online, want to thank you for an excellent talk.
Okay, thank you.
And let's thank